Yo guys, what is going on? It is Invin here, and today what I'm bringing to you guys is a video on my thoughts on the current state of PvP in New World and how it has been since the update. Now, the update I'm referring to is, of course, the March Heart of Madness patch update, release, whatever you want to call it, that we've just been seeing here, where we've had the Blunderbuss and the brand new Tempest Heart added, alongside a ton of changes, QOL updates, all of that good stuff. And honestly, like I said in a previous video, I think that this is one of my favourite, if not my very favourite update to date, because it is so good. It's very, very smooth for 90% of players. I know there's a few servers that have got issues, but on the whole, it's been pretty good. And it's sorted out a lot of bugs and issues that we had prior to this update, which is fantastic. Now, it's worth prefacing this video with, like I said there, I am aware that some servers and some players have had some issues, but on the whole, generally speaking, this has been one of the smoothest updates. Hopefully the stuff gets sorted out for those servers that do need it, but speaking from my own experience, my server has been absolutely miles better since this update, and that's kind of what I wanted to touch on today, is kind of how the PvP feels, how the wars feel, how all of that good stuff is coming together, and especially touching on the new combat systems we saw released just before in February, where it's the queuing system and that kind of thing as well. Now, before we fully jump into today's video, if you guys haven't done so yet and you do want to see more New World content, whether it be tips, tricks, guides, whether it's commentaries and updates like this one, or whether it's all of the latest and greatest news and updates from New World, then make sure you're subscribing to the channel down below, as I do cover everything to do with New World here on the channel. And if you do go on to enjoy today's video, then do drop me a like down below, as it massively helps to support my content here on the channel. And without further ado, let's jump into it. So firstly, I want to talk about the current meta, because I know that's something a lot of players are going to want to bring up and going to want to address. And I think the thing to say about that is we are sitting in the same meta that we were sat in February, which is predominantly Great Axes. It is predominantly Warhammers. You've got a lot of mage stuff in there, Fire Staff, Ice Gauntlet, Void Gauntlet, depending on which server you go through, that's a little bit different, but generally the mages are doing pretty well. Dex players can do well, but obviously they're not as meta, if you will. And then obviously you've got things like the Void Gauntlet with the Rapier, etc., kind of off-meta builds that a couple of players using can really improve a war roster and kind of do super well on their own, but they're not kind of what the majority of players are using. And the meta is basically just an explanation for what most players are running in terms of weapons, abilities, and then in turn as well those ability perks on their armor and such. So yeah, that's kind of where we're sitting. Bruisers, mages are really in fashion, with of course healers always being in there because they are very much needed. Now, what we have seen is a change from kind of the way it was going previous to February's patch, which was you could get single target DPS, high AoE burst damage players, kind of mages throwing AoEs everywhere, heals throwing AoEs everywhere. Even with the overlap changes that we saw, this was still kind of providing a good benefit to both of the teams, with the damage, with the heals, with the crowd control, with the rends, etc. What we've moved towards now is more of a situation where you've got mages playing utility builds, almost in the same role as a medium bruiser, where you're kind of going in for the damage and you're going in for the utility, and that is your job, is to kind of gather groups of players up with the Gravwell or with the Ice Storms, etc., and then Ice Wall them, insatiable Gravwell, throwing in your Maelstrom, all of that good stuff to kind of rend, apply debuffs, and damage the targets as much as possible in a small group, for then a few other players to try and jump in on that as well, help you to get those kills, and kind of move in, so big group attacks, and then spread back out. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the wars, particularly. Open world PvP, some servers have a lot of it, some servers don't. My server in particular, it tends to be when we're pushing territory, which makes sense. Now, this has been, again, similar builds because people kind of just throw on the same gear, but you are seeing a lot of people running the musket, a lot of people running the blunderbuss. Obviously, most players are still leveling up the expertise on the blunderbuss, so give it a week or two for people to get up to that maximum 600, and we will probably start to see a lot more coverage, shall we say, of this weapon. It is very, very good. And without wanting to influence that meta shift too much, I think we could be seeing a big increase in the usage of this weapon when players level up their expertise and kind of work it out, because it is great for utility, it's great for damage, it fits nicely into either the mage or the bruiser role that I talked about there, with kind of half and half utility damage style of play. So lots of room for it to be fitting in nicely. Now, moving back to the open world point, we're seeing a lot more players running Fire Staff in open world than we do in Wars, and it's pretty good. Same with OPR, we're seeing a lot of action from that as well. Also, we're seeing a fair amount of action from weapons like the Hatchet. This, of course, is to do with how players are discovering the honing of the melee attacks. Again, that has brought up Hatchet, the Great Axe, etc. back into full fruition. A lot of people running the Spear. I would assume this is because they've got a high level one from doing the high level mutations. There is a great melee DPS weapon there, but this is doing a great amount of damage in PvP with the correct build. You can honestly CC lock someone and get them down in one burst, even if they are a heavy bruiser, which is something that we haven't seen for a long time. I would say that the Spear's really coming up the ranks now, whether it's just because more people are using it and it's getting more coverage, or it's just been improved in some ways. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't used it too much myself, but I do know that it has been absolutely shredding through people. Open world, OPR, not so much in Wars though, so that's kind of that. Now, moving on to the bulk of what I want to talk about today then, which is how it's actually been feeling and reacting after this update. So the Heart of Madness was released. They changed quite a lot of things in terms of weapon balancing and in terms of the way that the fruition of combat works, and all of these changes seem to be pretty good on the whole. Like I said, bar a couple of exceptions, at my server particularly has been super smooth since this update, and literally probably the smoothest it's been since the beta, which is absolutely crazy. We've had still 50v50 wars. Now, I know they were talking about reducing that to 40v40, and that has been postponed for now. However, with these updates, whatever they've done, it seems to be a lot better, even with 50v50. So maybe we can hold off on that for now. We'll have to wait and see. But we've seen a lot less desync by a long shot. We've seen a lot less lag, and personally, you know, for my server and my group and company and such, we've seen a lot less issues with the queuing system. Now, that being said, the queuing system can still sometimes be a little bit clunky, especially when you're still first getting used to it, because of course it will switch weapons if you try and switch, and then it'll use the ability from that one, and it might be that you thought you still had your old weapon, you're spamming F or R or whatever your keybinds are for it, and you end up using the wrong ability, and that does still happen from time to time, but that is just the nature of the game. And I would actually say that if that is the thing they're going to stick with, it's more of a learning curve to get into the introduction of how that works, because now it is more smooth. Previously, it was still very clunky, and you couldn't really learn it because there wasn't a kind of queue, it was just a big mess. Now, it's working a lot better, so I actually quite like the system. I think for bruisers, it's not so bad, but for some other classes, they've had more issues with it. However, that is not what I'm going to talk about today. That's kind of just something that either you like or you don't at the moment, and they're still monitoring the process of. But what I wanted to talk about in regards to it is, of course, the ability of it to work in the game, and thanks to the reduction of lag and issues such as that, we have seen that work a lot more smoothly. So that, at least, regardless of what you think of the system, is, of course, a bonus. Now, also touching on the way that the interaction of combat fluidity is working now, I see a lot more streamlined combat. The abilities seem to be going off and working as expected in terms of you can see the Gravwells much more consistently. There's lots of things happening on screen, but it all seems to not be lagging out, and it seems to just be there and happening in the present, which is really good. And there seems to be a lot more consistency between the approach of different abilities. So for example, if you Gravwelled and then you get Ice Walled, you can see all of those debuffs stacking up on your hotbar nicely, you can see all of the abilities on screen, and you can also see the casting from the enemy players or your own team's players, and it actually makes sense as to what's happening now. So I do like the changes that they have made with this patch to make that, you know, more consistent. It's worked really well, and I think a lot of players are very, very happy with it. Now, we've also seen a big change in the way that some of these weapons interact, and right now, like I said, there still seems to be a pretty clear-cut meta of best things, but like I did say as well, there is also some good off-meta builds that are working super well, which does mean that if you have got the skill capacity to bring some of these builds into a war environment or into a PvP in general environment, then this can actually be really good, and I think that these can work. So things like the musket, things like the bow, things like the spear, they can work really well. It is just situationally, and again, in wars, you might want to use a different build, because predominantly, especially the spear, you're looking at 1 or 2 target DPS, whereas something like the Great Axe, you can hit multiple players, you can get them in the Gravwells. Warhammer is the same thing. Ice Gauntlet, Fire Staff, Void Gauntlet, all of those good stuff. So overall right now in New World, the PvP is looking pretty decent. It's the most stable we've seen it, it's the most consistent we've seen it, and that is something that I really wanted to touch on in today's video and kind of bring attention to, because a lot of people were getting frustrated with the game because of the lack of this. So with this update, we've got a massive increase to it, so I thought it was worth mentioning. Now, in terms of what I would like to see going forward then, well, I would like to see the Void Gauntlet still, you know, adjusted just a little bit there, because there's some things that are too good, some things that are way under what they should be now, and it kind of needs to be brought up to a middle point. I want to see the blunderbuss, a few adjustments. I think, again, in a couple of weeks when this is more widely used, people will understand what I mean by that, but just monitored, which I know that they are doing for definite. And, of course, in autumn, when we see the Greatsword come into fruition, how this will work in relation to all of the other things we've got going on. What its abilities will be are going to be a big factor, but also the way that it plays. Is it going to be able to cleave and hit multiple people like the Great Axe? You would think so because of the size of this thing, so it could be pretty cool, but we'll have to wait and see with that one. Overall, right now, happy with the state of PvP, much better than it was. Still a lot of improvement we can have to make it much more smooth, much more consistent, but compared to where it was, this is fields and fields beyond that, which is amazing, and a lot of the community are really happy with the direction that this is currently going in. So let's keep it going in that direction, and let's keep giving feedback and useful stuff that AGS can use to continue to progress in this direction. Now, of course, like I said, this is just my opinion, so some people may have different experiences, or they may have different thoughts and feelings on this. So do let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. Has this patch brought more combat stability and fluidity to you, or do you think it's been worse? What are the positives, what are the negatives from this patch in terms of combat that you have found for yourself through playing? Like I said, for me, it's been a lot better, but there is still a few things that can be improved. However, it's certainly heading in the right direction. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Hopefully you have enjoyed. If you have, please do be sure to drop a like down below, and if you do want to see more New World content from the channel, then do drop a subscribe as well. Other than that, that is going to be it. So thank you for your time, thank you for watching, and I will catch you again very, very shortly on a brand new upload. Take care and peace.